In this module, I'm going to talk a bit about working with others. And this is something that we have to do in every part of our lives, whether in the office or whatever our job is, as students in group assignments, with friends and family. Here's a newsflash that may actually come as a shock to some of you. Other people are different from you. Now we know that, but we still act a lot of the time as though other people will have the same preferences and attitudes as we have, and then we're a little bit shocked when we find that they don't. They don't want to do things the same way we do. So it's useful to understand that if you're going to work productively with others. Difference has consequences. Preferred ways of behaving. Do you prefer to be organised and have things ready before, or do you prefer to leave until the last minute? Expectations of others. Do you expect others to behave the same way as you do? Judgments about what is acceptable and what is not, and that's one of the primary causes of conflict within groups. The result, different expectations. And unmet expectations lead to conflict. If you think about it, most of the time when there is a conflict, it's because one person thinks that a certain thing should happen and somebody else has a different expectation, and those two collide. So it's helpful to understand that A, we are different from each other, and B, to actually be able to explore what those differences are. First of all, understand yourself. Now, personality profiles are limited, but they can be useful in understanding what your preferences are and raising awareness of your own behaviour. And they're also a useful framework for you to share your expectations with other people. Then, of course, you've got to extend that courtesy to other people, understand how they are different, what are their personality profiles, their values, beliefs, their expectations. Useful reading on this is an article by a guru of management thinking, and you might describe him as somebody who studied the human being in the context of business. He kept on writing well into his 90s, and this is one of his later articles, and it's available for you to read. You've probably heard of the Myers-Briggs Type indicator, and if you haven't, you'll soon find that other people have. It's one of the most widely used personality tests, and it aims to measure the psychological preferences about how people see the world, how they make decisions, how they prefer to act. It's based on psychologist Carl Jung's work. Jung and Freud were the two pioneers of psychoanalysis and psychology. And it's called Myers-Briggs because it was developed by a mother and daughter whose surnames were Briggs and Myers. Now, one of the complaints that's often made about Myers-Briggs is that it lacks academic validity and reliability. In other words, if you do the same test on different occasions and different contexts, you may very well get a different profile. Psychologists can get very upset about this, but at the same time, I think that kind of misses the point, because the value of working out your Myers-Briggs profile and talking about it with other people that you're working with is starting a conversation about how your preferences differ and working out what your mismatched expectations might be so that you can negotiate them successfully. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator works on 4 dimensions. Extroversion and introversion are about where you focus your attention and where your energy comes from. So extrovert people tend to focus their attention outside, and they're often energized by interactions with other people. Introverts tend to focus their attention inwardly, and they often find that other people drain their energy, and to recharge their energies they need some time alone. So you can see immediately that if you've got an introvert and an extrovert in the same group, then they are probably going to have different preferences with how they exchange ideas. Sensing and intuition is about the way you take in information. And a shorthand way of describing it would be that sensors like data, whereas intuition people like concepts. They tend to look at the big picture, sensors tend to look at the detail. Thinking versus feeling, this is the way emotion comes in to the way you make decisions. Thinkers tend to be more logical, more rational, more based on evidence. Feelers tend to refer to their emotions and their values, their gut instinct. And finally, how you deal with the outer world. Judging is planned and organised and tends to have fairly clear views on what's right and wrong. Perceiving, people who prefer perceiving are more spontaneous, more open to ideas, more adaptable. You will find many descriptions of what the 16 types are, and that's as a result of the combination of the 4 dimensions. And here's one which assigns a label to each one, and the percentages represent the proportion of the population that have that particular profile. And as you'll see, some are more common than others. Now, this is important in group work. Some of you probably hate group work. So think about what factors would motivate you to work with each other, with others. Clear expectations. People who hate group work are often people who think they can do the work quite well on their own. So they don't really want to be at the mercy of how other people do work. So setting clear expectations is obviously going to help there. Similarly, people who struggle with group work because they're not quite sure how to contribute will be helped by clear expectations from their other group members. A say in how things are done? Yep, being able to contribute what you do best. Obviously, there are some aspects of a group task that maybe nobody does best, and you have to work out how to do them anyway. But mostly, it helps to work to people's strengths. An interesting and worthwhile project. So, hey, if you've got some choice about what you work on or how you go about it, try and find something that's going to engage everybody. And it turns out that these are fairly common objectives in terms of motivation. Really interesting talk to listen to. It's one of those ones that's illustrated with animations about what motivates us. And watch it for interest if you want the detail, but the shorthand is that money is very limited as a motivation, and it only works when whatever you're doing is simple and straightforward and doesn't require a lot of thought. What actually motivates us is autonomy. In other words, being able to take charge of our decisions rather than having to do exactly what other people tell us. Mastery, getting better at things. You may find that a useful motivation as you do your studies and your group work. Hey, I'm getting better than this. I used to find it hard, now I find it easier. This subject in particular will give you the opportunity to master the art of presenting to an audience. And purpose. I'm doing something worthwhile. If you can actually make your assignments, craft them so that they are intrinsically worthwhile to you, you're more likely to be motivated to complete them. And that in turn means you're more likely to do them well. So the takeaways from this module: people differ. They differ in behaviours and they differ in preferences. It's important to understand how your behaviour is perceived by others, and it's important to get to know people you work with in whatever context so that you understand their preferences. Clarifying expectations helps to minimise conflict. If you understand other people's preferences and the sorts of things that are going to make them work productively or are going to give them stress and make them less productive, then it's easier to minimise conflict. You can also use your understanding of differences to resolve conflict when it arises, because it always does. And if you've ever seen the theory of group formation, forming, storming, norming, performing, the storming is the conflict part. Productivity depends on a certain amount of conflict, otherwise there'd be no exchange of ideas and you wouldn't actually develop your thinking processes as well. So it's useful to notice what motivates you and what motivates others and use that information to work productively together. Think about that as you do your group assignments, but also as you observe entrepreneurial companies.